I don't know how to exactly say that. I had many, what I call them projects. They were different people in the town that I followed, watched. Kathleen Bright was one of the next targets, I guess, as I would indicate.
How did you select her?
Just driving by one day, and I saw her go in the house with somebody else, and I thought that's a possibility. There was many places in the area. College Hill, they're all over Wichita. But anyway, it just was basically a selection process. Worked toward it. If it didn't work, I just move on to something else.
Previously on this channel, I covered the case of Edwin Lara, who kidnapped, murdered, and allegedly sexually assaulted Kaylee Sawyer after striking her with his car. The details of Kaylee's death were particularly chilling because of how opportunistic of a crime it ended up being. Wrong place and wrong time to the extreme degree. In the introduction to that video, which received some mixed reviews, the idea was posed of our basic instincts keeping us out of danger. That small voice in the back of your head saying, something just doesn't feel right. It's likely a majority of people have had this voice go off in their head throughout the course of their life, and have probably acted based on the proddings of this voice. But it's impossible to know if your instincts were correct and you avoided certain disaster, or if they were wrong and you simply misread a situation. That is, until it's too late. This concept is made even more frightening when we consider that the most heinous crimes, the ones that are potentially the most difficult to solve, are the crimes in which there is little to no connection between the perpetrator and the victim. And in those instances, sometimes not even the sharpest of instincts will save you. The footage on screen right now is the security camera footage from the Common Grounds coffee stand in Anchorage, Alaska on the evening of February 1st, 2012. The barista in the video is 18-year-old Samantha Koenig, who was working alone that night. A man approaches the window unseen by security camera footage and orders a coffee. Samantha turns around to make it, and when she faces the window again, she reacts like this. The man was holding a gun. He instructs Samantha to turn off the lights, enters the coffee stand through the window, zip ties Samantha, and walks her out of the coffee stand through the employee door. That is the last she's seen on security camera video. That man was Israel Keyes, who would later be known to be an infamous serial killer, convicted rapist, arsonist, burglar, and bank robber. Details were later established that Keyes drove around with Samantha tied up in the back of his truck for some time, while trying to piece together a plan to extract a ransom from her family. At one point, he even goes back to Samantha's house to retrieve her debit card with her still in his truck. He then returns to his own home where he took Samantha to his shed, sexually assaulted her, and strangled her to death. He then used pictures of her dead body to fool her family into thinking she was alive so he could attempt to extract ransom money from them. Later, after he was caught, he was asked why he chose that specific coffee stand out of all the coffee stands in Alaska. He simply said that it was the one that was open the latest. and it just so happened to be Samantha Koenig who was scheduled to work on that shift that evening. Authorities believe that Keyes may be responsible for over 11 murders across the country, and perhaps even more that have remained unsolved.
Yeah. Once you stop telling us significant information about other crimes, then these guys couldn't control what the rest of the FBI is going to do. And the playbook says, if you've got a serial killer, you're going to have to go through that house, right, with a fine-tooth comb. Even though they can say, hey, Israel's told us there's nothing there. Well, they're going to do it. And the only way to hold that off is to say, well, look, he's cooperating, he's giving us information. But when you stop, then there's going to be consequences. We're trying to be as reality-based about this thing. We've always given you what we thought was actually going to happen in the real world. And it's the same thing from Vermont. If we had had more information in Vermont, I think Vermont would have been a whole lot more quiet and cooperative. As it is, they've been really cooperative, right? They haven't filed any charges. But, how long can we hold off on them without another piece of information? So,
you're a reasonable person. Don't you think if use somebody else for an example, this type of case, someone who's not cooperating and not talking with law enforcement, don't you think that if this would have been viral across the United States, every place you've ever been, don't you think that, if you hadn't been talking to us, we don't have any other choice but to try to do it on our own and use all the information that we've put together about you and your whereabouts and put it out to those communities for help. And we haven't done that because you've been talking with us. That was one of the things up here. These lines here, the road search.
From Ted, on those lines. We talked to someone out at the lab when we were talking about, when the time comes when you decide that you want to give additional information so that we're prepared on what we need to do to be able to respond quickly. We asked about, what are the chances of if there is someone that is if there's a body at the bottom of the lake, what are the chances of that body still being intact 7 years later, or that kind of thing? What are we going to be looking for, and what do we need to have in place in order to be able to find that? And one of the things that they said, which might be of interest to you, is depending on how the body was put down there, it's possible that the body is actually very intact. If the body was just tied to something and dropped into the bottom of the lake, there's definitely still going to be long bones and that kind of stuff. You won't have finger bones and that kind of stuff. There'll be femurs and long bones and that kind of thing. If the body was contained in something, even a bag of some sort, it's very possible that the body could still be intact, depending on the depth of the lake. All of that determines the kind of equipment that we would need in order to locate the body. And so, obviously not asking you for details about where and who and all that kind of stuff. But in terms of the Washington bodies, were they contained in something, or were they just tied to the milk jugs? Is it something where we might possibly actually still get it intact?
No.
No? Okay.
We'll get the whole story eventually.
Okay, we're just going to get parts so that we can move.
No, the only person I ever shot was Bill Courier.
Everybody else is trying.
Yeah.
Or I don't want to have the wrong impression, So everybody else was strangled, or was there something else?
Is it fair to say that we were looking at a lot more around the Washington area than no? Just the two in Washington?
No, there's a couple. There's a couple in Washington, and then the two related to the book. Is that right?
Yeah. I'm not going to talk about this.
What about other caches, like another cache?
Alright, I'm going to run the busy up
You
and
gotta take a leak or anything before we take them out?
I'm all right.
You're not gonna eat this,
No, I'm good, thank you.
you sure?
Yeah, I'm sure.
Unfortunately, the true number was lost with Keyes after he killed himself while in custody shortly after his arrest. It is impossible to tell if Israel Keyes walking up to that coffee stand on that fateful night triggered any sort of primal fear response in Samantha. If, even for a brief moment, she thought to herself, "Something doesn't feel right," before turning around and coming to the realization that things were much worse than she could have imagined. Human beings oftentimes have an acute ability to subconsciously sense danger, whether situationally or due to another person. In the article Detect and Deter Danger with Sixth Sense Protection, Francita Halris, founder and CEO and chairman of Total Protection Services International, is quoted as saying, "Many of us already naturally sense when something feels off, but we often dismiss these feelings and even mock them. It's been said that humans are the only animals who sense danger and walk right into it, such as politely entering an elevator with a person who triggered your fear instinct for some reason. In other parts of the animal kingdom, when danger is sensed, this triggers the fight or flight response, as it does in humans. However, unlike humans, it manifests itself much differently. Animals, especially ones that are particularly vulnerable to predators, will immediately run from what they sense as a dangerous situation. This, of course, is much more straightforward. The animal runs because the predator has only one goal: to eat them. There are no pleasantries, no ulterior motives, no misreading of intentions. If an animal is confronted with a predator and that instinct kicks in, it's run or die. In addition, animals can readily identify predators visually. Human beings cannot. A human predator can look like the most mild-mannered, easily overlooked individual, but inside can have horrible intentions. This makes it even harder to identify and catch those who commit these crimes. This man is Dennis Rader, the infamous BTK killer. Between 1974 and 1991 in Wichita and Park City, Kansas, he was responsible for the murder of 10 people.
Former prosecutor Alifair Burke is breathing a sigh of relief. She lived in Wichita at the time many of these murders occurred. Psychologist Howard Brodsky has helped the police on the BTK case since the 70s, and also with us, the accused killer's neighbor, Jim Reno. Welcome to the program, everyone. Alifair, you grew up in Wichita during the time period of these murders. What was that like?
Well, we moved to Wichita from southern Florida, and my parents envisioned this idyllic, quiet Midwestern town, and one of the first things we learned when we moved there was that we lived in a neighborhood that was literally being stalked by a serial killer.
You know, What's especially chilling, Dr. Brodsky, is the fact that he's a family man, active in his church, employed. The guy wears a badge. He lives a double life. He doesn't fit the profile of what we would have expected for the BTK killer.
Right. I expected a fellow who would be much more isolated because, you know, from the stuff that we know about this guy, his attitudes were so off the map that it was hard to figure that he could find a setting that he could function in. And he's also a very, very good actor. I think the real guy is the BTK guy, and he's acting in all these other settings. And that every interaction that he had, he was plotting how he was going to pull the wool over these people's eyes. This fellow takes advantage of people. He is disloyal. He is contemptful. And he takes advantage and manipulates everyone he runs into.
BTK, which stands for Bind, Torture, Kill, would sneak into his victims' homes or force his way in with a gun. He would then tie up the family or individual, spend a significant amount of time in the home talking to them, torturing them, or giving them false hope that he would release them before stabbing or strangling them. Dennis Rader had a bachelor's degree, worked at ADT Security, held a job as a city compliance officer, was the president of the Christ Lutheran Church Council, and raised 2 children. Even from his presentation in court, one can gauge that he is clearly well-spoken, and when glancing at him, many would overlook him as being anything more than a normal, working father and husband, with no idea of what was hiding under the surface.
All right, Mr. Rader, I need to find out more information. On that particular day, the 15th day of January, 1974, can you tell me where you went to kill Mr. Joseph Otero?
I think it's 1834, Edgemore.
All right. Can you tell me approximately what time of day you went there?
Somewhere between 7 and 7:30.
This particular location, did you know these people?
No, that's no, that was part of my, I guess my what you call fantasy. These people were selected.
All right. So you
Okay.
you were engaged in some kind of fantasy during this period of time?
Yes, sir.
All right. Now, when you use the term fantasy, is this something you were doing for your personal pleasure?
Sexual fantasy, sir.
I see. So you went to this residence, and what occurred then?
Well, I had did some thinking on what I was going to do to either Mrs. Otero or Josephine, and basically broke into the house, or didn't break into the house, but when they came out of the house, I came in and confronted the family, and then we went from there.
All right. Had you planned this beforehand?
To some degree, yes. After I got in the house, I lost control of it, but it was, you know, in the back of my mind, I had some ideas what I was going to do, but I basically panicked that first day. So
Beforehand, did you know who was there in the house?
I thought Mrs. Otero and the 2 kids, the 2 younger kids, were in the house. I didn't realize Mr. Otero was going to be there.
All right. How did you get into the house, Mr. Rader?
I came to the back door, cut the phone lines, waited at the back door, had reservations about even going or just walking away, but pretty soon the door opened and I was in.
All right. So the door opened. Was it open for you, or did someone?
I think one of the kids, I think the junior, or not junior, yes, the younger, Joseph opened the door. He probably let the dog out because the dog was in the house at that time.
All right. When you went into the house, what happened then?
Well, I confronted the family, pulled a pistol, confronted Mr. Otero, and asked him to, you know, that I was there to basically I was wanted to get the car. I was hungry, food. I was wanted, and asked him to lie down in the living room. And at that time, I realized that wouldn't be a really good idea. So the dog was a real problem. So I asked Mr. Otero if he could get the dog out. So he had one of the kids put it out, and then I took him back to the bedroom.
You took who back to the bedroom?
The family, to the bedroom, the 4 members.
All right. What happened then?
At that time, I tied him up.
While still holding him at gunpoint?
Well, in between tying and yes.
All right, after you tied them up, what occurred?
Well, they started complaining about being tied up, and I re-loosened the bonds a couple of times. Tried to make Mr. Otero as comfortable as I could. Apparently had a cracked rib from a car accident, so I had him put a pillow down for his head. Had he put I think he Parker or a coat underneath him. They talked to me about giving the car and whatever money. I guess they didn't have very much money, and there I realized that I didn't have a mask on or anything. They already could ID me, and made a decision to go ahead and cut them down, I guess, or strangle them.
All right, Mr. Rader, we will now turn to count 5. In that count, it is claimed that on or about the 4th day of April, 1974, in Sedgwick County, Kansas, that you unlawfully killed Catherine Bright maliciously, willfully, deliberately, and with premeditation by strangulation and stabbing, inflicting injuries from which she did die on April 4th, 1974. Can you tell me what occurred on that day?
I don't know how to exactly say that. I had many, what I call them projects. They were different people in the town that I followed, watched. Kathleen Bright was one of the next targets, I guess, as I would indicate.
How did you select her?
Just driving by one day, and I saw her go in the house with somebody else, and I thought that's a possibility. There was many places in the area. College Hill, they're all over Wichita. But anyway, it just was basically a selection process. Worked toward it. If it didn't work, I just move on to something else. But my kind of person is stalking and scrolling. You go through the trolling stage and then a stalking stage. She was in the stalking stage when this happened. Well, I started strangling. Either the parent broke or he broke his bonds, and he jumped up real quick like. I pulled my gun and quickly shot him, hit him in the head. He fell over. I could see the blood, and as far as I was concerned, I thought he was down and was out, and then went and started to strangle Catherine. And then we started fighting because bonds weren't very good, and so back and forth we fought.
You and Catherine?
Yeah, we fought, and I got the best of her, and I thought she was going down, and then I could hear some movement in the other room. So I went back, and Kevin, no, I thought she was going down, and I went back to the other bedroom where Kevin was at, and I tried to re-strangle him at that time, and he jumped up, and we fought, and he at that time shot me because he got my pistol that was in my shoulder here. I had my Magnum in my shoulder, so
shoulder holster. Did you have it in a shoulder holster?
Yes, and I had the Magnum in my shoulder holster. The other one was a 22.
I will accept these pleas of guilty and adjudge you, Dennis L. Rader, guilty of murder in the first degree in count 1, a Class A felony, murder in the first degree in count 2, a Class A felony, murder in the first degree in count 3, a Class A felony, murder in the first degree in count 4, a Class A felony, murder in the first degree.
Would a person's sense of danger have triggered by having a conversation with Dennis Rader? Or even by standing near him in a store or walking past him on the street? How refined is a human's ability to sense when something is wrong? And how often can those feelings be trusted? For example, take a look at the following pictures and try to determine if the smiles are real or fake. Obviously, in recent times, social consciousness has evolved to the point where we know specifically what kind of cues to look for when trying to determine genuine emotion. Creases in the eyes, creases in the mouth, the movement of the whole face as opposed to simply the corners of the mouth moving upward. But many can recognize and process these things subconsciously without even realizing it. Here's another example. Pretend you're in a fairly busy restaurant or cafe. You are sitting with your eyes closed and someone approaches you from the right, making no sound. Chances are, even with your eyes closed, you would be able to identify which direction you're being approached from. it can feel almost like a sixth sense. However, what really could be happening is your brain is processing all of the ambient noise, and when an individual stands next to you, that person creates a sound shadow which your brain processes as someone is standing to your right. Of course, you don't consciously think of all of these steps as it's happening. Your brain does it automatically. In this same way, your brain could be processing dangerous situations in ways you don't even realize, but your brain boils down all that it's sensing into terms that can be easily understood in the moment. Something doesn't feel right. Another thing that could contribute to our brain sensing danger besides a feeling that we get from other people is the situation. Imagine the busy parking lot of a superstore at midday in the summertime. It's unlikely that this environment on its own would trigger a danger response from your brain. However, take that same parking lot, make it nighttime right before close, and remove most of the people and cars. Chances are you'll be much more careful and aware of your surroundings under these circumstances because your brain is wired to believe that the likelihood of something dangerous occurring is much more likely to happen in the dark and when you're isolated. This is the Monon High Bridge Trail in Delphi, Indiana, a popular spot for locals to come and hike or walk on the abandoned train trestles. More notably though, this is the area of the infamous Delphi murders of Abigail Williams and Liberty German in February of 2017. On February 13, 2017 at 1:35 p.m., two friends, 13-year-old Abigail Williams and 14-year-old Liberty German, were dropped off near the Monon High Bridge for an afternoon hike. About half an hour later, German posted on Snapchat regarding the hike. This was the last anyone would hear from them. They missed the 3:15 pickup time from German's father and were subsequently reported missing at around 5:30 p.m. The next day, at around noon, the bodies of the two girls were found about half a mile away from the Monon High Bridge, on the north bank of Deer Creek. What launched this particular case into the stratosphere of media attention were the two unsettling pieces of evidence that went along with it. First, being the post of the two girls on the bridge, one frame of which shows a man who police regard as the prime suspect in the murder. The other and arguably even more unsettling piece of evidence was an audio recording recovered from German's phone, which captures the voice of the killer, giving instructions to the two girls.
Guys. Down there. Guys. Down there. Guys. Down there.
Despite leads coming and going along with the pictures, sketches, and recordings, as of the making of this video, the Delphi murder case remains unsolved. The Monon High Bridge and the surrounding trails were not high-crime areas. They were not known for kidnappings and murders. The girls didn't go in the dead of night when everything was dark. They went during the day. They didn't hike alone, they hiked as a pair. And they didn't take off without telling anyone. Multiple family members knew where they were, what they were doing, and even had a time frame of when they were supposed to return. And even still, it wasn't enough. Because no one could have known that on that particular day, at that particular time, the Monon High Bridge was the hunting ground for a deadly predator. And while it seems fatalistic to simply say that we're all just potential victims of circumstance, one must acknowledge the sheer coincidental nature of some of these terrible crimes. Let's Not Meet is a subreddit on Reddit that is literally devoted to stories of individuals coming across creepy or potentially dangerous individuals, but managing to escape unscathed. At the time of making this video, Let's Not Meet is almost at 1 million subscribers. For an example of the kind of content that is posted on Let's Not Meet, here's one of the stories that was on the forum. I live in Finland in a fairly small city, and this happened to me a year ago when I was 14. So it was Friday evening, and on every Friday our mom let us go to the store and buy candy. So me and my 12-year-old sister left our house to go to the store, and it was already dark outside. We made our way to the closest store, which was over a mile away. While walking at some point, there's a man behind us walking the same way, but I didn't think much about it at the time. He could just be going to the same store. So I continue chatting with my sister while the man is behind us following at a safe distance. We get to the store with no complications and the man followed us into the store. We take our time selecting our candy and get to the register to pay. While I was packing the candy to my backpack, I saw this man buying only a chocolate bar. Pretty far away to go for a chocolate bar, I thought, and at this point my suspicions started to rise for this guy. I get out of the store with my sister and we start making our way back. We walked for a while and I quickly glanced at my back and the man was still following us. I took a look at my sister who seemed totally unaware about the man's presence. We continued our walk and up ahead of us was an unlit dirt road that continued for a good part of the trip. So I looked back again and the man was still about 60 feet away. At this point, I was almost certain that he was following us because on our way to the store, he did not walk past this part of the way behind us. The dirt road goes through a forest and had a curve at the start of it. Once we got to the curve, I looked back and noticed that the man can't see us. So I pulled my sister down and we ducked under the woods. My sister is saying something and I just whisper, "Stay quiet," to her as I wait for the man to come. I could see the man's shadow coming down the road and he started looking for us from the road. He walked back and forth. Now I was certain he was following us all that time. My heart was racing and I tried to be as quiet as possible. The man didn't find us but continued running forwards. We stayed in the forest for a while before getting the courage to come out. We walked the rest of the way home with no problems and get to our house. We eat our candy and have a good evening. But that really did bother me for a while, and especially my sister. Thinking about this still gives me the chills, and the thought of getting caught in that situation creeps me and I try not to think about it. I wouldn't want to meet this guy again. Now, of course, since this is a free online forum where anyone can make a username and post whatever they want with little to no evidence or verification, it's more than likely that a large share of these stories are either fake or exaggerated. Regardless though, the sheer size of this subreddit speaks to the fact that these kinds of creepy encounters are fascinating to hear about and analyze. In a majority of these stories, that little phrase, "something just didn't feel right," or some amalgam of it will play a major role in the writer nearly avoiding a potentially dangerous situation. Like we mentioned, a majority of these stories are probably fake. But it just goes to show you how widely recognized that primal feeling of something being off is. If you're watching this video, it's very likely you're fortunate enough to live in an area of the world that is, to some extent, domesticated and relatively safe. The society which we find ourselves in right now, we don't have to hunt, we don't have to evade saber-toothed tigers, we don't have to worry about enemy tribes coming in and raiding our camp in the middle of the night with spears. Those much more primal indicators of danger that our ancestors may have needed to rely on every single day have faded into the background. But just like the dangers have evolved, so have our ways of sensing them. We may not be able to pick up on a saber-toothed tiger slowly creeping through tall grass, but oftentimes we can tell if somebody's being shady around us or perhaps trying to manipulate us. We might not be able to pick up on cues of our campsite being surrounded by an enemy tribe, but we do have the ability to acknowledge if we're being stared at or perhaps followed. The problem arises when we shut off that voice in favor of behaving more acceptably in society. What are the chances that the guy asking me for directions is a killer? What are the chances that the person who has been following me for the past few blocks actually wants to hurt me? What are the chances that the person I'm talking to online has bad intentions? What are the chances that someone is waiting for me by my car in the parking lot? Most likely 99.99 times out of 10, the answer is slim to none. But that 0.01% can come with a high price. So don't shut down the voice in your head. You don't have to be paranoid. You don't have to come across as a lunatic. But if your instincts are screaming to you that something just doesn't feel right, listen to it. It might just save your life.